Ready?
Yep, I sure
Excellent.
am.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Judy Richardson, one of the two co-chairs for the Transition Committee of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Isabel, will you help us with roll call and tech check?
Absolutely. So starting with a roll call, Judy Richardson,
Here.
Mike Leahy,
Here.
Mary Lou Henrich,
I'm here, but staying off screen. I'm a mess from camping, so trying to unload stuff. So I'm gonna not show my picture.
welcome back. Richard Gibson,
Here.
thank you. Charlie Swanson, don't see Charlie yet. Antonio German, don't see Tony yet. Anne Lovejoy,
Here.
thank you. Jamie Osborne, let us know that she'll be unable to attend today. Mickey Dirting will be here, but will be a little bit late. Paula Weldon, don't see Paula yet. Jensina Hawkins,
Here.
Eve Gray.
Here.
Thank you, everybody, and that's a quorum.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and thank you also for watching for members as they arrive. I know everyone's busy, and I appreciate everyone spending time with us. Let's take a look at the agenda, please, for today. We'll start off with a board update from Dr. McDonald, who is here with us. Launch into some phase 2 planning that will talk about the work that happens after the transition committee has completed this bit of work. Mimi will lead us through and lead us through transition committee wrap up and the road ahead. Any public comment we'll take there at that point in the meeting. Anyone can offer reflections and we will adjourn. I think we'll also add a bit of a crosswalk project that I've been working on that shows the efforts of a couple of other committees that are working towards improving healthcare in Oregon. Okay, that's the agenda. Take it away, Mimi.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm Mimi McDonald. I'm the Executive Director of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board. Again, thank you all so much for participating today. Today's our last transition committee meeting, and I just have so much gratitude for all of the time and expertise that has come from this group. So I'm going to give a brief board update. As some of you probably know, 2 of our board members are rotating off of the board. So we have board member vacancies. Both of them are community engagement posts. Michelle Glass will be leaving at the end of September, and Amy Fellows will be leaving at the end of December. There was an open application period, and the staff and board members got together, and we have submitted names, a list of names that goes to the governor's office. The governor's office makes the ultimate decision on who will be appointed, and that appointment will be voted on by the legislature in September of this year. So we'll hear probably a week or so before that. So end of August is when we should know who our new board members will be. Next update on some board meetings. We had one board meeting that was dedicated really to talking about the revenue replacement target and how that was arrived at, including some additional savings that were estimated using information and both from the Milliman report and Echo Northwest, but also from literature reviews as well. Also, the board spent some time talking about levers to either reduce expenditure of the plan or revise the revenue plan. No decisions were made about that. It was just sort of a discussion on some potentials. At the last meeting, the Legislative Revenue Office report of 2032 was summarized by our colleagues at Echo Northwest. That's attached to this meeting's information. And we also talked about briefly about waivers and very briefly about the information technology strategy. I will say kind of one of the more important discussions that occurred at the board meeting, which was last Thursday, which some of you may have heard about, is there was a very detailed discussion about the work that has been done so far on the revenue portion of the report that's due to the legislature in September of this year. A decision was made by the board that they would prefer, or they decided not to release the information that's with the revenue report in September. They felt that it was not ready at that moment. So it's still a little bit to be determined when that information will be made available to the public. Obviously, that work is ongoing. So I don't want people to think that is stopped. The work is ongoing. It's just depending on to be in a format that the board felt comfortable and felt that they could really get behind to approve, and then for submission to the legislature and for the general public. So I'll stop there and I'll see if any of our board members want to add anything or if people have any questions. All right, I am not seeing any hands, so we can go on to the next agenda item. I'll turn it over to Lee Hastings.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we can just dive right in here. So we're going to be talking just a little bit about what we've been terming phase 2 of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board's work. So what this transition looks like from phase 1 that we're currently into this phase 2, some of those anticipated areas of analysis that we flagged that you all have pointed out could use, additional work, et cetera. And then we're going to really walk through some of those key deliverables that we've identified and discuss what work staff can lead, prepare, or need to defer for consultants. Next slide, please. So just to give us a sense of where we are, we're in phase 1, which I have just assigned the label strategic direction because I think that really sums up what phase 1 is all about. It's about really putting this legislative report together that establishes what the strategic direction of a universal health plan would look like. And it includes all of these elements. And it's not to say that these elements have been, addressed and don't need any further work, but it establishes that strategic direction on these various elements, such as, having a public corporation, trust fund, certain key elements of provider payment, such as primary care and behavioral health. We've done a lot of work regarding various, assumptions on expenditures and administrative savings. We've talked about preliminary sequencing, eligibility, enrollment. All of these things we have kind of a general sense of, and having everything together in that legislative report is really going to conclude phase 1. Next slide, please. So phase 2, and again, these are all my labels, so I'm open to suggestions if anyone has anything snazzier, but I'm calling phase 2 the implementation blueprint. So after having the strategic direction, this is really about trying to get into the nitty-gritty of how does that implementation work. And some of those numbers that we've been working with, we know that we could do some further analysis, further refinement. We know that we have to do some public outreach. And so we've identified, I think this is about 7 kind of concrete analyses, and there are probably a number of ancillary ones, but these are really the fundamental ones. So of course, ongoing fiscal analysis is really essential. We know that we want to continue as much as possible. Oh, is there a comment?
Mary Lou, I think you're not on mute, so you might want to mute yourself. Thanks.
Thank you.
If there is a comment, just interrupt. I know I'm going fast. But of course, we know that we want to do ongoing fiscal analysis. Those numbers are really essential. So looking at expenditures, as well as a variety of different financing scenarios and that long-term sustainability. The economic impact analysis, this is a big one that we sort of intentionally deferred, as it does have a lot of implications for the implementation aspect of it. And there was a lot of stuff that was just really dependent on us having made some decisions regarding strategic direction before getting into this, but wanting to understand what the overall impact of a universal health plan could be on Oregon, on households, employers, workers, and the economy, because there's been a lot of discussion about how our models are sort of static. They look at what we currently have, and of course, that's not how the economy operates. It's highly dynamic, and implementing something like a universal health plan is going to send ripples through absolutely every part of our economy. So understanding what some of those impacts might look like. infrastructure, and really examining geographic access. On a related note, that workforce analysis for availability and transition considerations, as we do have people that are coming into the Universal Health Plan and either they didn't have access before or they intentionally limited their access because of financial reasons. We know that we're going to need to be able to account for changes in capacity, and just understanding what some of those challenges look like and getting a better sense of options is going to be really essential. Operational administrative readiness, again, this is another one where there's some preliminary work, but we absolutely need to go deeper with it and really assess what functions exist within various state agencies that can really be leveraged moving forward towards implementation of a universal health plan. Public engagement has been a huge one, really to solicit that statewide input, assess public understanding, and to refine some of these elements to make changes if needed, based on how the public perceives the plan and the proposed financing and just a myriad of other issues that can get really technical, but things like the some of the tax credits, et cetera, how those are going to function, and how we're going to be communicating those to the public. And then finally, of course, understanding employer behavior. This is really essential because we have such a large segment of our employers that we can't compel to join a universal health plan due to ERISA. So really wanting to understand their potential behavior if there is a universal health plan available, what would be really important to them, to participate in a universal health plan, and what some of those possible impacts could be on the labor market. So that was a lot, and I promise we'll touch on each of these again. Next slide, please. Just a quick note, what phase 2 is not. Phase 2 is not talking about operations. I would consider that phase 3 at best, maybe phase 4. I love my phases, I'm sorry. But these sort of operational things, such as that really detailed provider rate setting, designing a claim system, procurement, benefit administration, all super, super, super important. Also would be preliminary to start talking about them before we have some of these other analyses and other decisions made. So just want to be really clear that we know these things are out there and that they need to be addressed. But in terms of making sure that we're using our time effectively, we want to make sure that we've got all the preliminary decisions really set in place before we get into some of these operational functions. Next slide. All right, so here we go. We're going to talk about each of those things in a bit more detail, but I do just want to acknowledge, one of the key restraints and one of the things that, we're thinking about a lot right now is that our funding through the end of the biennium is what it is, and we don't have additional dollars to bring on consultants to really start with this work. So we are looking at about 9 months where the staff are going to be really responsible for moving this work forward. So what we are asking and interested in input is how staff should really prioritize this. So we'll talk about, some of the different things that we have planned, but of the phase 2 work, there is a fair amount that we can get started on, some of which we can do quite a bit on, I think, but would love to hear from all of you as well. Next slide. So there are really 2 major buckets of work that we've identified through the end of the biennium. On the left-hand side, of course, is the legislative support. This is really, I would say, trying to tie up that phase 1 kind of work. So once we get that legislative report out, of course, the goal is to have some legislative concepts that go before legislators in the 27 session. So we anticipate quite a bit of work there, preparing those legislative materials, preparing supporting analyses, briefs, etc., responding to requests for amendments, briefing legislators, stakeholders, the board, answering any questions and concern, and just in general, coordinating with the many, many people who are very interested in seeing this work go forward. So that is one bucket of work. And then the second bucket of work that we'll be talking about over the next several slides is really that preparation for those future analyses, for that implementation blueprint. And of course, there's a number of kind of generic things that we can do on all those, such as identifying and really refining those research questions. We've already begun to do this for several of those, defining policy scenarios, inventorying existing work, developing scopes of work, and as much as possible having procurement and budget stuff ready to go so that should new funding come through, it's something that we can hopefully jump right into. Next slide. All right, so in that second bucket of stat preparation, just walking through each of these really 7 core areas. And you'll notice that some of them have the little stars next to them. That star really indicates an area where we believe that staff may be able to do pretty significant preparation work. So some of these outputs are decidedly more technical, require things like actuarial knowledge, et cetera, that staff don't necessarily have. Other ones that are a bit more policy, that involve a lot of research and consolidating references that are already out there, staff can actually do quite a bit of work. And, should consultants be needed, they could come in absolutely towards the end. But this provides us something that we can provide a really good launch pad for. So the first 2 are ones that do fall into that more technical category, that fiscal analysis and that economic impact. Some preliminary staff work is really consolidating what we already have on expenditures and revenue assumptions, identifying different policy scenarios, documenting unresolved questions, and defining really in very concrete terms what we're looking for from any kind of future analysis. And then, of course, we would need the consultant to actually provide that because this is somewhat technical and does require, some of those skills and access to data that we may not have as staff members. Similarly, for the economic impact analysis, really defining what's going to be tested, priority outcomes, and really inventorying what information, what resources are out there so that that can be presented so that consultants don't spend time just doing a general scope of the Oregon environment. That's something staff are absolutely prepared to get started on. And these are things that have already been under consideration. The employer survey, this one is something that we do believe staff can actually do quite a bit of preliminary work on. In fact, it's even been suggested staff could try to reach out to employers, and that's something we could certainly contemplate. But in addition to that, compiling existing data that's out there, trying to define different employer types, and to the extent that we want to do a survey, really preparing that survey or that research scope. Those are all well within functions that we think that staff can do. Some things that might later require a consultant to come in is if we wanted to do any kind of additional modeling of what that behavior could look like, or look at second-order labor market effects or second-order effects on benefit and compensation. Next slide, please. All right, 2 more, that delivery system analysis. There's, of course, a lot of work out there. Staff can certainly do quite a bit of synthesizing as well as narrowing down questions. The delivery system is a it's a vast thing, and we want to be sure that when we bring consultants on to do this work, that we know exactly what questions we want them to be answering. So that'll be sort of the main focus there, is really trying to drill down into what information is needed in order to best understand the needs of a universal health plan. The workforce analysis, this is one that staff have actually done a fair amount of research into and can continue to do. We have a real benefit here because there are a number of state agencies and boards and task force and advisory groups already dedicated to various workforce analyses. So we have a lot of groups that we can already leverage, a lot of reports we can leverage, and even trying to connect with some of those groups in, I almost call it the off season. It's not really the off season, but in this sort of biennium time period here, that's absolutely something that staff can take on and potentially do quite a bit on. Consultants, if we determine we need them, would again be looking at some of those second order, long-term projections, whether there are shortage modeling, and any impacts on compensation and the overall kind of labor market. Next slide. This is the last one on these. So final two reports, operational readiness, or not necessarily reports, but scopes of work, operational readiness, and public engagement. Again, I think these are areas where staff can do quite a bit of preparatory work. Operational readiness, we've received some materials from the Oregon Health Authority. We can certainly, I think, line those up a little more clearly now that we've got more board decisions on what a universal health plan would look like. We can really start to match that readiness to the capabilities that would be needed in a much more concrete way. That's work that we can absolutely do, as well as looking into waiver authorities. That's something that we have a number of different reports and memos from consultants on, and it's really just a matter of kind of consolidating some of that and starting to put some actual timelines and plans to it. So operational readiness, definitely a strong contender for some of this pre-biennium work. And then public engagement, of course, ultimately we will want to retain some sort of communications consultant to help us with a broad engagement strategy. But in terms of identifying what kinds of groups that we want to get input from, as well as how to reach the public and potentially some limited session outreach, these are things that we could certainly engage in. And then finally, I do just want to note, because these are not necessarily part of the implementation blueprint, but we do have ongoing work as well. Mimi's been quite involved in tribal consultation, and staff are also continuing to refine a lot of the questions on governance. And there's a number of just federal issues that just on an ongoing basis, we're continuing to research and incorporate as well. So no shortage of work, I would say. Next slide, please. All right, with that, I'll be quiet for a little bit, but the key questions for this committee are really on those kind of two big buckets of work. And the first one being, what questions or concerns should staff be prepared to address during the 2027 legislative session? Just curious, some of you have been through this process a number of times, and we'd love to get input that so that as much as possible, we can prepare to be responsive to legislators, et cetera, and to the kinds of concerns that they might raise. And then the next one on some of that preparation work, are there additional data analyses or institutional resources that we should be incorporating? Are there any areas that we've missed?
Thank you, Lee. I think this is a fairly comprehensive path forward. If any committee members have questions, thoughts, or comments for Lee, go ahead and unmute.
This is Mary Lou. I think, yes, I'm still got a foggy head with a cold here. But one of the things that I do think that staff can do, and ultimately I think should be doing, is really doing some of this reaching out to the employers, the unions, et cetera, making some phone calls. I mean, not, sometimes I think we build this up to be, some big process with consultants, with whatever. And sometimes I think, Oregon's still a small place. I've worked here all my life, and I came back from many times to meetings across the country where I kind of kissed the tarmac saying, thank God we're small enough that we kind of know the people, we can call them up, and we can put people in a room. And so I encourage staff to pursue some of that it's like, let's, make a few phone calls. Let's talk to a few of the people who really are the leaders, especially on those unions, and hear about them relative to the EPT and the EPT credit, some of those ideas that were floating around, and see what they have to say. That's my only input right now.
Thank you very much for that.
This is pretty comprehensive. And then just spending time in Salem during session at the different, going into the different hearings that are healthcare policy related, identifying who all the lobbyists are, sitting down and beginning to talk with key lobbyists for different interest groups. I think that will just give you tremendous insight into those who might be lobbying for or against, and not just healthcare related, certainly business related hearings where you're seeing industry lobbyists and different businesses. I think those conversations will yield dividends because, of course, they have networks of a whole bunch of key stakeholders. And I think by having those individual conversations, you'll be able to get a wealth of perspective. They may be able to bring things back to their interest groups and bring feedback so that we can prepare for building a model that is ultimately likely to be successful. So that to me is a key strategy for this long session. I don't know yet. It'll be interesting to see what legislative concepts the board decides to bring forward. I don't have insight into that, but I think understanding the pros and the cons from all the different people's perspectives will be really a great opportunity.
Thank you. All right. Well, I would just encourage folks, if you do think of anything, you can always reach out to staff. We would love to know. Anne.
Just briefly, in some of the other work that I'm doing, it's really helpful to have your list of sponsors on board early and get more of them than you expect you'll need.
Mary Lou?
I think that I agree, Anne. But from other parts of my life, I know there are some very active advocate organizations that are currently meeting with many legislators and working on, although all the details we keep, we're not totally ready, not totally done, and there's all kinds of interesting, various people have differing opinions, and this is how it goes. That's why they talk about not watching sausage or legislation being made. But I guess I know there are already a lot of supportive people who are out there. So it's not only the board and the staff, but there are others too. So anyway, but it definitely, we need as many positive sponsors as we can get.
Thank you. Jensina.
As we look even further down the line, is it possible to have possibly a plan A and a plan B both drawn up for accounting for the elections of 2028? Because those will determine a whole lot of the feasibility of our ability to progress, or whether we have to put some things on the back burner where we can expect to receive support or where we can expect to lose some headway.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We can absolutely think about incorporating that. Thank you. All right, seeing nothing, Mimi, I think you're up next.
All right, thank you so much, Lee. And thank you all committee members. All right, so what I'd like to do for the next little bit, I'm going to talk about the work that this committee has done, and for a couple of reasons. One, to remind you all of all the amazing work you did, but also what I would like to do is really prompt you to think about, we try and capture as many questions as we can and incorporate those into the work that we're doing. But as we're going along and I kind of jog your memory about things that we've talked about in discussions, please feel free to say, I feel like this topic wasn't dealt with enough. I think we need, more details, more questions. And I also wanted to let you all know of some of the work that this group has done, how it really has impacted board decisions. So I, again, just kind of to sort of come full circle so you all understand how much your input in this committee and the committees you've been before, and what we hope will be, ongoing interactions with people, because just because the committee is done does not mean that we don't still have your emails and we won't reach out to you. So just that's just a warning. You can always ignore them. But I want you to know that you all are very, very valued in your opinions. Yes, Mary Lou.
I guess one of my questions is it absolutely necessary that you quote disband the committee, or can you put it on a leave or a little hiatus or something that doesn't mean we have to keep meeting right now? But it seems like these people have all volunteered their time and have listened through a lot of things and are maybe more involved than many other people out there. And I'm just kind of wondering, some of this, and this may have all been decided before I ever joined the board, but some of my frustration has really been from these kind of like, well, this is stopping now, this is starting, this is, it's kind of like, okay, where is that, decided at? And is there any, I think we can make up our own kind of rules on some of this. There doesn't seem to be any specific rules on it. So anyway, I just thought that maybe when kind of things get moving again, or that you need something, and that all of us try to stay, I mean, as a board member, of course, I'm in a little different role here, but anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, I will ask our committee co-chairs. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that topic right now or towards the end of the meeting when we talk about the road ahead.
Maybe the end of the meeting, but we have a charter on the website that discusses beginning, middle, and end of this committee.
But anyway, so yeah, thank you, Mary Lou, though, for bringing that
Okay.
up. I appreciate that. Okay, so on to the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, literally this first part is just the topics that we covered in the months. You all very graciously were willing to commit to 2 meetings per month, which is a tremendous amount. I didn't even count the meeting that we had in March. So in April, you'll see we had the topic of administrative savings, the prioritization of these transition topics, and really coming to a way that we could prioritize them, and what you all worked on first. Of course, working on implementation sequencing, which is one of the biggest things that this committee discussed, and governance and statutory gaps. Then going on into May, once again, administrative savings and implementation sequencing, governance and statutory gaps. Then we brought in the topic of financial transitions. And we'll go next. In June, we talked about the information technology blueprint. We talked about prescription drug strategies twice, and that good discussion about the transition roadmap and about communications and engagement. And then here in July, we're talking about our phase 2 planning. So I'm going to go into detail for that. So next slide. Okay, so you will notice there's a little award there up at the top about administrative savings. So this topic, which was extensively evaluated by members of this committee, both during this committee and at other committee meetings as well, was hugely beneficial and really helped move along the thought process for the board, and helped to not come to a complete agreement, but to enough of an agreement that we were able to move forward. So there were 2 committee meetings, extensive literature review. There was an HMA memo that you all looked at. We had our expert guest, Dr. Jim Kahn, who came and spoke. And I really feel that this topic was very, very thoroughly evaluated. This group, from looking at the literature and with help from Dr. Khan, kind of felt that the administrative savings estimate averaged about 10% of the expenditure. Again, these are savings under a universal health plan, where there's a big range from 7 to 15%. Now, all of that information and that discussion went into a presentation in front of the board in May, and the board members went along with it. They too, I mean, they had a broad range of estimating somewhere between 7 and 15%. But utilizing and consolidating all that information really enabled the creation of this revenue replacement target. In other words, the board was able to decide, all right, we believe this is what the expenditures will be. We believe that this is the amount of savings that can be accomplished under a universal health plan. And so therefore, this is the amount of funds that need to be raised to replace the revenue that would be coming from individuals and then from businesses. So huge shout out and thank you to that. Next slide. The next, I would say the next very, very, very big topic and one that was discussed extensively has to do with the implementation sequencing. I would love to say that there was a complete solid plan, but of course, we're not there yet. However, I think a lot of different viewpoints were expressed and thoroughly vetted. We had 2 meetings with extensive discussions, going over a lot about required federal authorities and the federal constraints that we're up against, because of course we're a state in a federal system. Kind of the different approaches that we discussed in this committee, the Big Bang approach, the entire population all at once transitioning to a universal health plan. We discussed briefly the potential for a service phase-in, which is still a topic of discussion in other circles. So for example, having a primary care trust fund. And then of course, we discussed population phase-in, perhaps starting with the Medicaid population only, or with the sort of commercial and exchange population and how that could look. This group decided that they wanted to focus on the sort of Big Bang and population phase-in approaches. So we narrowed our focus a little bit. In addition to that, this committee also looked at comments that came in from those targeted focus groups that were held, and they compared their options both in terms of the population that would be covered, the time to launch, again, those federal dependencies and complexity. This committee actually very much sort of leaned toward the Big Bang approach. I think I would say from the comments that seem to be mostly related to the potential for the savings which would be available at that time, although a population phase-in did.
Maybe the committee just be put on hiatus.
Oh, Mary Lou, you're not, yeah, thank you, you're not on mute yet. So the group leaned toward a Big Bang approach, although a population phase-in was also a solid consideration. On to the next slide. So again, this was all of this discussion and opinion points from this committee were brought forth into the June board meeting, and again reviewed, implementation options. It ended up that the board members, of course, we have 3 board members on this committee. The board eventually came to they favored, not 100%, but they favored a population phase-in, slightly more than what would be called the hybrid approach. So the hybrid approach, this is something that Lee described as all of the populations with the exception of Medicare, with Medicare to be phased in later. So again, these were just, a way to ensure that we were taking a solid look at all of the angles and all of the different aspects of implementation. Still more work to be done, absolutely, but an excellent start. And again, from use from this committee. And again, always happy to hear more feedback. Next slide. All right, governance and statutory gaps. This was also some very interesting discussions, talking about what types of authorities a public corporation should have and can have based under statute, and then really wrestling with the idea of what would a public corporation board look like, but, size, who should be on it, what kind of representation, should people be paid? And the answer to that one was seemed to be yes. And then, ensuring expertise and diversity. So that was some of the governance and statutory gaps discussion. in addition, you know, there was a lot of discussion around coordination of coordination with employers sponsored insurance because of ERISA laws. We know we cannot compel employers to participate. However, certainly there is would require coordination with, of course, the plan that employers would eventually see the benefit of only having a unified health plan. But during that transition time, discussing the difference of if the universal health plan coverage is primary or secondary, what would be more simple, what would cost more. And for this one, I would say really what it turned up is that there's a significant amount of further analysis that's needed because it is indeed so complex. It seems like it would be a simple decision, and clearly it was not. So moving on. Great. Financial transition. So this is really not the revenue plan per se, but thinking about a type of revenue plan or model, when would that financing begin? And when would it begin in relation to the launch of coverage? And what types of tax instruments should be implemented first? What protection mechanisms are available? And again, this one is more of, we had more, not so much of an ultimate decision point because there's so much that is still left to be decided. But part of the work of this group is actually bringing up these questions and really bringing them to the surface for use in that phase 2, kind of all the things that Lee was describing, that all the work that's happening in this group will actually is still in preparation for what comes next. And sometimes it takes longer to find out the right questions to ask than it even does to find the answers. So I just want to really remind people of that and how important all the questions that this group has posed are to this final process. All right. Next slide. Some of the considerations that this group brought up, which are really very important. Of course, critical access hospitals, we know that it's a big challenge right now for hospitals, not just the critical access ones, but in our state. And what would happen if some federal funding sources are lost? There is, of course, the discussion, there needs to be a mechanism for raising money prior to launching a universal health plan. And people thought, well, maybe the consideration would be to start the employer payroll tax earlier to fund a startup. And there was, you know, a note, if there was a 1% EPT, raise about 1.4 billion to accumulate for initial funding. And then just looking at other examples, the implementation of Paid Leave Oregon, and also a similar program that has happened in Washington. And they have things that worked very well, and they also have some things that did not work so well, which I think will all be important points to be taken into consideration. Next slide. All right. Last, certainly not least, I think is the discussion around prescription drug strategy. Now, we know that in terms of savings, estimated savings for a universal health plan, the two big components are administrative savings and the potential for savings around prescription drugs. So there were two presentations there. We talked about this in other committees as well and discussions, and there were multiple cost saving measures discussed. Of course, that single formulary, it certainly frequently comes back to that, the availability of bulk purchasing, the possibility of drug manufacturing. And I think that the committee came down really strongly in favor of a universal health plan, a public corporation really owning the governance and the analytics that would be needed for a prescription drug program. So in other words, not just completely outsourcing, sort of thinking of prescription drugs as something very separate, but really making that an integral part, just because of the exceptionally high costs that it is in a percentage to overall healthcare. Some of the things that people brought up were consideration of the utilization of an impartial organization similar to the Health Evidence Review Commission here in Oregon, or NICE, which now I can't remember exactly what that acronym is for, but it's the one in England to help determine a formulary. And in addition to that, also a big discussion, well, small-ish discussion, which needs to be a bigger discussion around the 340B program. So that's that federal program vital to many organizations in Oregon, and that's just going to have to be a consideration in pharmacy discussions. I think one of the things, I actually think, Co-Chair Richardson, if you would be up for it, I think now would be a great time. I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to ask Judy Richardson to, because we're going to talk about the road ahead, and I think this is a great tee off to this, because Judy created this tremendous crosswalk that has to do with the work of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board, but also of the other two, or well, there's probably
Sure,
more
I
than
can
two
explain
out
them,
there.
Mimi. Yeah.
Thanks. Do you
and
want me to share my
Go ahead
screen
and
with
share
it?
the screen and I'll explain what
Sounds
the
good.
composition.
Thank you.
So while we've been working in the Universal Health Plan Governance Board, there have been two other groups very active over the summer, spring and summer, one of which one of our board members was taken to. That's the Medicaid Advisory Group, Alignment Group. That was appointed by the governor as a group to figure out what can happen to help the 200,000 people who are going to lose Medicaid coverage because of HR 1. The other group is the acronym is HSSG. It's the Health System Sustainability Group. It is a group that was convened by former Governor Kitzhaber and a number of healthcare leaders and business leaders to think about sustainability of the whole system. So all three of us were kind of grappling with the current environment, trying to pull together recommendations and be very pragmatic about how do we get from point A to point C, knowing that point B is this really dire economic environment. So you'll see on this left-hand column, actually the Medicaid Advisory Group alignment document is a public document. The draft UHP board direction, this is content that I gleaned from a draft of the final report that we're submitting to the legislature in a few months. So it will also be publicly available. And the HSSG alignment group did make a formal recommendation to the governor, which I also believe is publicly available now. In the left-hand column under policy domain, I found 10 different areas of focus where each of us, these three groups, were saying something and making some sort of a recommendation. And so for each cell, then I went under each of the reports and just give a little snippet of what that report said under, for example, coverage continuity and affordability. And then the last column here on the right gives the governor's office some consolidation, some synthesis of all of the three of those recommendations. And really, my intention was to position what the Universal Health Plan Governance Board needed as far as support from the governor's office and the legislature to move forward. So we called them stepping stones previously, but they may have been actions or activities that other groups are calling for that we can leverage to make our plan successful in the end. Does that make sense? And I'm happy to share this. I mean, the committee is more than welcome to look at it if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit.
You want to go, pharmacy and purchasing
Yeah.
is down a bit.
Yeah.
Like the sixth one.
Sorry, we'll get there. So just make sure that people get a chance to take a look at it. It really is all the topics that have been covered. And it looks like Mary Lou has her hand up.
I sure would just like to have a copy, so if you want to figure out how to get it to us as the committee members, because I'm having trouble reading, the size
Sure
of it
you
and this quick amount, but it sounds, thanks Judy for doing this work. That's a very, important thing to have done. So thank you very much. And I'd love to take a look at it.
Yeah. And Charlie, it looks like your hand is up.
And I agree with Mary's comment. Thanks, Judy. And I would like to see it. I'm sure probably the whole committee would like to see it in a format that we can have time to read. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a Word document. You're more than welcome to, digest it with a cup of coffee, with a caveat that this is my opinion and my work and my digest of reading these three documents. I'm not, this is not the board's recommendation or position. It's just, I think anybody who read each of these three documents, which are quite lengthy, would notice there are similarities, and I just made a grid. So take it for what it what it is.
All right. Yep. Well, we'll make sure and get it out to everyone. Thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing so you can, your eyes can unblur. And it looks like Mike has his hand up.
Yeah, uh, I'm not sure how to say this, but first of all, obviously, all of us are very appreciative of all the staff work and all the work of all the members of the transition. I'm just trying to reflect here on what we did and what, yeah, as Lee was saying before, what needs to be done. So I'm going to just share a couple of comments. One is I've had 3 different conversations with our newly come back board member, Bruce Goldberg, to try and figure out what the short-term focus the legislature is on and how and to what extent that connects with UHP. And in that conversation to Bruce, I said, you know, when I joined and agreed to be on this board and transition, I was really hopeful we could come up with a playbook, and I feel that we've come up with a lot of good work, but I don't think we have a playbook yet. So maybe one of the ways I want to characterize this is our opportunities to do that. The second thing, and I mentioned this to Bruce, is we seem to be stymied by the fact that we have not made enough of a financial investment in this effort. And I'm struck by the fact that people in Colorado came to kind of like the same position, but they moved to basically get some private financing, because I think we've been unnecessarily stymied. So I hope that people don't think that just because we don't have money, that all we can do is whatever 2 staff people can do between now and June. I hope that we can figure out that there may be some things this fall that we can further incorporate it. And then the last thought is, to me, it's a very humbling observation, and that is how complicated this work is. That it's so easy to criticize this stuff, but from a systems perspective, how very the system has been so broken and so convoluted that I think I'm becoming more realistic, that maybe I have to move down some of my own expectations about how much really can be done. But that said, I'm really hopeful that a number of you will continue to urge us on, to challenge us, to see to what extent we can get common ground. And again, I very much like that Judy is trying to do that. Bruce Goldberg is trying to do that. So I'm hopeful in the next few months that some things it won't necessarily reflect the report we're doing in September as much as my own sense is I hope by the end of the year, by the time the legislature gets in session, that we'll use the transition work and further improve upon that. And I'm hopeful some other things will come together by looking at the groups of our work and the work of the other committees. So I wanted to thank everybody for their participation. Thank you.
Mary Lou, I'm not sure if your hand was up from before or if you had another comment you'd like to add.
It was just a quick thing about, can Judy tell us, or somebody tell us how to get a hold of the, whatever, the HSSG or the Kids Harbor Group report? I'm just would like
Mary
to
Lou,
see it.
I'd be happy to put hot links in a document that goes out to the committee that link to the
Great.
publicly available documents.
Thank you.
All right, Isabel, do you mind? I'll turn it back over to Isabel driving. Which again leads us to sort of we've been talking about what's next. So as I mentioned, in September of 2015, there's a legislative report that is due. The board has decided not to include a revenue portion in that report. However, as I mentioned, the work continues, so it has not stopped. Lee discussed in great detail, which I think was really helpful, the work that this group hopes to get done, this group meaning staff and the board, you know, from the time of the report through June 2027. And I really appreciate all your folks' insights into, you know, ways to work effectively with legislators and ways to be involved. So I really appreciate that, and definitely will, you know, further input is delightful. 2027 to 2029, I would say is a little fuzzier than perhaps we would have hoped. As you may or may not know, the Universal Health Plan Governance Board does not have an end date. However, the funding does, at least for this biennium. So although the current service level budget is approved through the agency, it needs to be approved at the governor's office. That won't, so we won't know if the current service level is approved until sometime towards the end of this year of 2026. And there is also, Eve mentioned talking about the legislative concepts, and so I will share with this group just very broadly sort of the two very basic legislative concepts that are very much in development. So this is very, very preliminary. Luckily, we've had a tremendous amount of support from Senator Patterson's office and her staff, as you know, as well as people on the board and Lee Hastings, who has tremendous experience doing this type of work. So I want you to think of it kind of in two. once again, we're back into two buckets. Lee likes phases. I like buckets. So one of the buckets is that phase 2 work. So essentially, really working hard to lay out in as much detail as possible the type of work that needs to be done in 2027. That's the appropriate level of funding, as Mike said. Some of this work takes a lot of money, and that is one way to get it is through the legislature. So that's sort of what we're calling the phase 2 work of the legislative concept. And then the other work, and this is sort of a much broader work, and this is really, I would say, has a lot more interplay in terms of working with not just Senator Patterson, but different legislators and with advocacy groups and other people who are working on this, is development of the legislative concept to, at this point, the thought is to develop enough of a structure that could be described in 2027 legislation to be able to go to a ballot measure in 2028. So that's very broad, and I'm deliberately keeping it kind of vague and broad because that's where we're at right now. But that's the thinking right now. Things absolutely may change, but I just wanted to share with this group where we're at with that. So I'm going to stop there and see if people have other comments or want to weigh in on. Charlie, please.
So a basic question is, what is expected to be accomplished with a ballot measure in 2028 of the sort that is being talked about? What's the goal of it?
That's an excellent question, Charlie. And again, since it hasn't been created, so I will only, again, I don't want to speak as if this is come to fruition, but one of the concepts has to do with developing statewide support on a level that is deep enough to show to our legislators that a universal health plan is indeed something that is desired by the residents of the state of Oregon, and therefore that is something that would then be created. So it's sort of a stepwise. So this is one way to think about it. And of course, there are many other ways, but it would be a stepwise progression. There certainly are other folks with different ideas about legislative concepts for this, but I would say that that is not the only piece of it, but that's a centering piece to kind of give the voters of Oregon enough of a sense of what a universal health plan could do and how they could benefit from it. And giving enough of a, I would say, impetus to legislators and enough of a sense almost of an availability and a feasibility for them to recognize that this is something that's desirable, is important, and really is something that needs to be worked on. So I don't know. I don't know if Lee, if you want to add anything to that, Judy, anyone else. That was very broad. And again, it's not created yet. These are just theories. Sure, just leave me hanging out there. All right, you guys. And please save me. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Ann.
In terms of a ballot measure, that's also usually on a risk and a risk ledger. So you need to be careful with that as well.
Absolutely. No, there are so many pros and cons, but thank you. And yes, it is definitely not without risk. Mary Lou.
When I looked at the documents for the transition committee today, there was this report there from Echo Northwest. Is that being discussed today, or what? There it was hanging, and so I printed it off and been looking at it, but didn't have time to really, read it real carefully. But anyway, is that just put on, to have it there? I didn't know what the point was, and I didn't see anything. I mean, I know what the
Yeah.
point, but I didn't see anything on the agenda today.
Understandable.
Okay.
Understandable. I will just chime in with that, is that we have to create things ahead of time. And I did not anticipate the decision of the board regarding the revenue. So I thought there would be a sort of a different type of discussion around revenue and referencing that. So since that did not come to fruition, that's why that's still there, because it was already submitted. So there you go. But it's a published report, so people can certainly, it is publicly available.
Yeah. Thank you.
Richard, please.
For the potential of a ballot entry for 2028, I realize that it's still in the future and it's conceptual, but to what degree would the ballot, in order to get people to vote one way or another on it, have to specify especially a particular revenue plan, meaning a tax and premium payment plan? How much of that would need to be specified to put it on the 2028 ballot, or what's the thoughts that way?
I really am just out here on a tightrope, but I'm just going to jump into it and tell you my understanding, which is that's part of the discussion, is how much would need to be filled out. I will say, at this point, the one the board is working on would not have a fiscal ask in any way associated with the ballot measure. Again, where we're at right now. So it would, it's my understanding, of course, that one cannot on a ballot measure then compel the legislature to do something in the future, like put on specific taxes. So I think it would be more descriptive than anything else. But I think I think between now and the end of the long session, there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, but people who are much better versed in it than I. So, I think the more work that can be done between now and the legislative session about options and potentials, the better off and the better informed the legislature will be. So I hope to keep working on that.
And if this were to appear on a 2028 ballot, do I correctly assume that the 2028 legislature, not the next one, but the one in 2028 short session, would have a hand in shaping it? Is that a correct assumption?
Now I'm definitely getting out of my pay grade.
Well, okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to
Thank
figure
you.
out, like Charlie was doing, where does this
Yeah.
go and what
Yeah.
needs to be known by when?
Right. I mean, I think that the 2027 legislature would have a hand about what goes on, you know, what it more like what happens in 2027 long session would be about what it looks like for the 2028 ballot measure, but I'm sure 2028 session would have something to say about it too. Mike.
Yeah, I want to kind of respond to Richard's thoughts here, and share with you, Richard. I wish there was a good answer for this. I'll reference going back to last week at our board meeting that, and now remember, we make all these comments in public and all that stuff. I admit I was a little bit confused at our last board meeting. I wasn't sure whether maybe some of our board members were questioning some processes or whether we were moving the goalposts. And so I'm suggesting there needs to be some level of understanding and conversation about that. I mean, Richard, to speak to your point, if we have a very broad type thing saying, yes, we believe in universal health care, right? I mean, that's really moving the goalposts. You know, then some grouping still has got to come up with what the ad hoc committee tossed us with, if we can't resolve it. And on the other hand, as Mimi just said, to the extent that we can do some further work in the next 6 months, including even into possibly next year, and with some iterations and some public forums, etc., we just may be able to stay on the timelines that we're in. But it very much matters whether or not this is a generic thing on the generic and directional, and hopefully inspirational, but nonetheless vague for 2028, or whether we're really talking about implementing a universal health plan as approved by the public in 2028. I think that's kind of the nub of the issue. I hope we're not kicking the can down the road. It's certainly not my intention to. On the other hand, we've got to come up with a financial plan and a transition plan that we believe in, that's actuarially sound and that's credible.
Thanks, Mike. I think at this point, unless folks have other comments about this right now, I'd like to turn it over for a public comment. See if we have anyone.
I did not have anybody who signed up in advance for public comment today.
Well, that was easy. Then I guess we go on to the next one, and I'll turn it back over to our co-chairs.
Thanks, Mimi. Are there any reflections from the committee before we adjourn this this meeting and this body of work? I will echo Dr. McDonald's gratitude to each of you for the time that you have carved out of your busy, busy days to think about this work and to meet together. And I see Mary's hand.
I guess I'll just say a reflection that I gave at the board that I keep telling people and telling myself is that, and in fact, reading about the new movie, The Odyssey, has given me some pause to think also about things that I've participated in my whole career, trying to make things better and trying to improve healthcare for so many people. And it comes to the point where you wonder sometimes, now looking at what you've done, whether you've actually made it more complicated, you know, and you've really not done what you had hoped to do. And I think with kind of the mess and the chaos that healthcare is in, I take my part in probably having helped make some of that mess happen. And so I just go back to Maya Angelou's statement of you do the best you can with what you know. And when you know better, you do better. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is that looking at what we do know now and what is out there, what many of us have helped create in the best of intentions, but has gotten extremely complicated. And something I used to tell my staff that there were times when the important thing was to teach people how to run the rat maze, how to get the cheese at the end. But then there came a point where you had to say, the maze is wrong. We have to kind of smash the maze. So that's kind of my reflection and why it's hard and what we're all trying to do in the best of intent. And there is no clear roadmap to this. So I guess we do know that we need to do something better. So let's keep at it. So thank you for being part of this and for letting me be part of it too. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments before we adjourn? Thank you again, everyone, for your time this afternoon. And with no additional comments, I will adjourn this meeting.
Everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Take care.